Although legendary actor James Garner was always regarded as one of the most laid-back, easygoing, and likable guys in Hollywood, he did occasionally get caught up in high-profile showbiz beefs. He generally got on well with the vast majority of his co-stars, but when it came to Steve McQueen, he wasn't afraid to let his true feelings about the King of Cool be known. Facts First presents James Garner confessed his true feelings about Steve McQueen. Garner described McQueen as a stubborn little cuss. Garner and McQueen shared the screen in 1963's The Great Escape. On set, they seemed to form a close, albeit unlikely friendship, but beyond surface-level pleasantries, the two stars frequently didn't see eye to eye. And that's putting it lightly. McQueen often inflamed and enraged his co-stars with his off-the-wall antics, both on and off camera. When asked to sum up his thoughts about McQueen, Garner didn't mince words. In a couple of beautifully merciless phrases, he put the man in his place. In The Great Escape, Garner played Flight Lieutenant Bob Henley opposite McQueen's Captain Virgil Hiltz. In his 2011 memoir, Garner was quoted as saying that, like Marlon Brando, McQueen could be a pain in the ass on set. He went on to say, however, that unlike Brando, Steve wasn't an actor. Rather, he referred to him as merely a movie star and a, quote, poser who cultivated the image of a macho man. If that wasn't cutting enough, Garner continued to tear McQueen to shreds by saying that even though he had a distinct persona that he'd bring to every role and that everyone seemed to love, you could always see him acting. That's the kiss of death, Garner brutally declared. It wasn't only McQueen's talent or lack thereof that was an issue for Garner. James also felt as if McQueen's behavior on set was entirely unacceptable. Throughout his career, Steve would often cause disruptions, and during the filming of The Great Escape, he almost walked off while throwing a tantrum over his role. Evidently, this volatile situation deteriorated to the point that the film's director, John Sturges, told Garner they were considering restructuring the movie so that he would end up being its main star instead. Garner, while flattered, didn't see how that was going to work, so he sat down with McQueen to try to figure out what the real problem was. Steve told James he didn't like the part because he wasn't the hero, and he found a lot of the things that the script had him doing to be corny. Sturges ended up adding in a few motorcycle stunt scenes to pacify McQueen, and even changed his character to that of a guy who goes off into the countryside to do some reconnaissance, only to unselfishly allow himself to be recaptured so he can share the intel he had gathered with others. So at the end of the day, all of McQueen's kicking and screaming paid off for him, but this still didn't sit right with Garner, and he never let him live it down. McQueen suspected Garner of having an affair with his wife. James Garner died of a heart attack caused by coronary artery disease on July 19, 2014. He was 86, and he'd been in poor health since having a stroke in 2008. 3 years before his death, Garner recounted his storied career in the memoir The Garner Files. He spoke frankly about several former co-stars and contemporaries. Amongst some of the more stunning revelations were his assertion that movie mogul Jack Warner was among the rudest men he'd ever met, and that actor Charlton Heston's acting was stiff as a board. When discussing his relationship with Steve McQueen, he likewise didn't sugarcoat his feelings. Not only did he discuss McQueen's unbecoming on-set behavior and childlike temperament, but he also recounted how at one point Steve even became convinced that he was having an affair with his first wife. In his memoir, Garner said he didn't believe that McQueen was a bad guy, but he did find him to be quite insecure. The actor further noted how Steve's wife, Nellie, had told him at one point that her husband was always envious of tall, dark men, and that he had been convinced she was having an affair with Garner. After detailing his conversation with Nellie, James wrote that he always thought of McQueen as a delinquent younger brother, and that inversely, Steve viewed him as an older brother. But despite that bond, McQueen received a fair bit of criticism in Garner's scathing memoir. In case it wasn't already obvious, Garner never slept with McQueen's wife. That assertion was baseless and a prime example of what Garner had to routinely put up with while maintaining his friendship with Steve McQueen. Garner dished on Charles Bronson. Another Great Escape cast member James Garner took issue with was Charles Bronson. In the Garner Files, James referred to Bronson as bitter and belligerent. While he described McQueen as one of his friends, he didn't hold the same chummy feelings for Bronson. In fact, he reserved much stronger words to describe his thoughts. Garner wrote that Bronson was infamous for using and abusing people. In addition to calling him bitter and a belligerent SOB, Garner felt like Bronson was always walking around with a chip on his shoulder. Whenever he was on set, tensions flared and nobody around him felt comfortable. In his memoir, Garner described a particularly unsettling experience that he had with Bronson at a poker game that he held at his house about a year after The Great Escape was shot. Evidently, Bronson attempted to withdraw a bet when it was already too late. Since Bronson was playing against what Garner referred to as a street kid who was working as a Hollywood extra, Garner forced Bronson to pay him what he was owed because he knew the money meant a lot to the kid. Bronson then apparently lost his cool and threw a tantrum. He and Garner butted heads, and things almost got out of hand, but fortunately it didn't come to blows. While the situation didn't lead to violence, Garner said Bronson swore to never work with him again. A few years later, however, James and his wife Lois Clark ran into Bronson and his wife at the time, Jill Ireland, at a restaurant. As if nothing had happened, the four had dinner together. But deep down inside, Garner knew Bronson still had a grudge, and he freely admitted to holding one as well. The Garner Files' other revelations. James Garner didn't hold anything back in his 2011 memoir. Not only did we learn about his true feelings on Steve McQueen and Charles Bronson, but we also received a number of other fascinating insights into his personal life and decades-spanning career. For one thing, we found out that despite his squeaky clean image, Garner had a history of drug use. James admitted in his memoir to smoking pot throughout the majority of his adult life. He also revealed that he once did lines with comedian John Belushi. Another revelation that might surprise some has to do with Garner's political leanings. In his book, he labeled himself as a bleeding heart liberal and noted that he considered Adlai Stevenson to be the most intelligent person to ever run for president, with Barack Obama coming in at a close second. As far as his film career is concerned, Garner only rated 2 of his movies as being excellent. He gave high praise to The Notebook and The Americanization of Emily. Of the latter, he expressed delight over how audiences have seemed to have warmed up to it over the years, turning the anti-war drama into a cult favorite and minor classic. 2 of his films he thought were only pretty good were Murphy's Romance and Grand Prix. But as far as the rest of his filmography, he only considered those films to be average at best and plain terrible at their worst. And let's end with how Garner got his start acting in the first place. As his story goes, while he was working at a Shell gas station, Garner met a soda jerker who told him that he had the right look to become a big Hollywood star. After serving in the Army in Korea, Garner came back to the States to discover that said soda jerk was now working as a stage producer. Since they had history, the producer decided to give Garner a non-speaking role in a stage production of the Caine Mutiny Court Martial. While working on that production, James learned how to act by observing Henry Fonda perform night after night. So as unlikely as it sounds, James Garner owed his career to a random gas station clerk from his hometown. Now it's time to hear from you. Were you surprised to hear about Garner's feelings about Steve McQueen and Charles Bronson? Let us know in the comments section below.